But the recorder is on, and I made sure that this time we have enough storage, even though it's the last class and there are no more homework assignments. Because what we'll talk about today are loops and some slightly more advanced topics. So even though there's no homework assignment, I think it still may be useful to some people. So that's why I'm still recording and making sure that there's enough space to record everything. Are there any questions about the homework that was due a few minutes ago, maybe a minute ago? No questions? Yep.
Well, I noticed that in the instructions for the homework, that you need to check for a null value inside the function, which you can't do because calling the function with a null value returns an error.
Okay, let's go to the homework assignment, and then you have to do it outside of the validate function.
Yeah, I did that, but right. The instructions specify within.
Oh, okay.
Every time you put that undo code, it would erase everything, the whole list from the contact list.
Every time.
I would press the undo. You put one phone number on the logo, for example. You go to the next one for fax number, and you just put any numbers that's not valid, so it's not valid, and it would erase the previous phone number.
Because the undo operation undo the entire form and not just that particular. Yeah, that's okay. Well, for the homework assignment. Yep, go ahead.
My question was on the form that you had to do the check for, to make sure all of them were.
Not all are no.
Not all were no.
Right.
Yeah.
You want.
I wasn't sure how that was really supposed to work because it wasn't like they were all together and it would let you go on to other things and they were all null. And yet it wasn't until you tried to save it. Like was that the point that it was updating? Well,
let's go ahead and let's take a look at the homework assignment, and I'll do it here. So when you guys have any questions, we can answer those questions here. Okay, so start with this access file. So we'll go ahead and save the file first. So we'll save it to a folder that we can easily find. I'll just overwrite the one that is already saved there. Okay, some validation code is already written. The business phone field of the contact details form, for example, already has its event handler done. However, this event handler calls a stub function that is not, basically functional yet. And I wanted to handle all of these, and I see, because we mentioned that we have to use a null is null inside a function to do it. You kind of have to do it outside of the function. Did I mention that in the class last time or not?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not in the homework assignment. But I did kind of mention that you have to do the is null outside of the validation function, because you cannot pass a null value as a parameter. That's the problem. So let's go ahead and do it. Okay, I'll go ahead and open up the document and start from there. Okay, so we have the form here, and let's go to contact details. And the first thing I want to do is not even to deal with the form itself. The first thing I want to do is to go to Visual Basic and actually finish up the rest of that subroutine. So I have to go to modules, go to module validate, and find the function so that it does not always return true. So it has to return false when the pattern does not match a phone number. And let's go back and double check and see. Oh, this is not it. There we go. So we have to accept these three different types of phone numbers. And to do that, there are two ways to do it. One way to do it is you can change the null value into an empty string before you pass it. So that way you can also check for the empty string inside is validate. But that's really not, it's not saving any logic. It's still, you still have to have the is null logic outside of the validation function. Okay, we have these three different types of numbers to recognize. Oops, I keep clicking the wrong one. Okay. Now I can do it in one single statement. I don't need a conditional statement inside the validation function. How many people used a conditional statement to do it? Okay. It's natural to do it, because we think, our mind works by, thinking in validation in conditional statements, because we just think, oh, if it is this pattern, it is good, return true. Else, if it is this pattern, return true, and so on. So I'm going to teach you guys, a trick, or a simplification technique where you don't need to do that, because what you can do is to say phone num like. And here we have the 7-digit local number. Okay, so this is not going to do the whole thing because it is only recognizing one of the many patterns that need to be recognized. So what I need to do is to say or. Now I'm using the underscore here so that I can continue the line in the following line. So this way everything kind of lines up. So the next line would say phone num like. So in this case we'll use the 10-digit number, but without using the parentheses, like this. And then I'll have one more line to recognize the one that uses parentheses. So we have parentheses, close, and then 3 pound signs, and then 4 more pound signs. Okay. Are there any questions about this expression here? I'm using one single statement to return whether a phone number is valid or not, because I'm using the logical operator or in order to deal with this. Yep.
Now, when I tried to do the one with parentheses around the area code,
Right.
it told me I needed to use brackets.
It does? Well, let's give it a try.
I'm not certain I understand the logic of this. The is valid phone number, that's the true or false.
Okay, there are two. Okay, the function name itself is valid phone number, right? That's the name of the function. When you assign a value to the name of a function, you are specifying the return value of that function. Because when you look at the function, it is inside. It is used where a Boolean value is expected. It is basically used in the other subroutine, in the event handler part of the code. Okay, let's.
So if it's one of these, it's going to return
True. Because the nature of an OR is if at least one side of the OR is true, then the whole thing is true. So what we are doing here is we are just looking for one of these likes to be valid. And if one of them is true, then the whole thing will return true and just say the phone number is valid. Okay. So let's go ahead and go back to the form itself, and we'll deal with detail form and the phone number here. And I'll just kind of point out how we use isValidate phone number. Okay. This is how we use isValidate phone number. It is a function. Okay, we are invoking or we are calling the function from here. Whatever value is returned by the function, gets into this place here. So it will be negated by the not operator, and then the whole thing becomes the condition of the conditional statement. Is that okay? Kind of? Is it okay? Let's give it a try first. Okay, let's give this a try and see how well it works. And this is in contact details, and definitely I have an invalid phone number right now. And it says that the business phone number is invalid, and it returns back to this one. Now one of you said that it will undo the entire form. Let's see if it does undo the entire form. So I'll just put in some street address here, and then go back and change the business phone number. And you're right, it undo the entire thing because the undo call inside the function undo the entire form and not just that particular field. I'm talking about this function here. If you don't do the undo thing, it will also cause another problem. So I'm not quite sure, how to deal with, just one single field being invalid. Okay. Are there any questions at this point about this one? Now this one does not deal with the null value. Okay, if I go back to the form and give it a null value, it does not handle that. So I just delete everything here and move on to the next field. And now we have a problem. We have a runtime error of invalid use of null. Okay. And the problem is happening right here. When I use a null value to pass as a parameter, it does not work. So what we need to do is to change this part of the conditional statement. And the first thing we'll do is to say not is null, and then that whole thing, business phone dot value, and I forgot to use a underbar first. Now this will fix the problem. Let's go ahead and see whether this is fixing the problem or not. So we switch back to access, go back to contact details, and this time I do this exactly the same thing. I remove the business phone number altogether, move the field, and it still doesn't like it.
Because you put and, it's also checking that.
So it's not short-circuiting. Okay, let's try and also. Okay. So the and is not short-circuiting.
Yeah, it's checking that it
It's
is
evaluating
null
both sides.
and is valid.
Okay.
I thought ampersand was the short circuit and.
And the spelled out end is the non-short circuiting?
Yeah, it might be double ampersand.
I thought there was just and they have a and also.
That might be it.
I could be wrong. No, I tried and also and it didn't take it. Well, there's one more way to fix this. I can put a conditional statement inside a conditional statement. Okay, let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, so for the second line, I will have its its own conditional statement. And what I need now is another level of conditional statement, which is here.
And a second if.
Second and if, and there's also no, that should do it. Okay. So this time it will work because it will definitely evaluate only one of the conditions first, and only if the first condition, which is null, is only if this condition is true, it will go ahead and evaluate the second one. But if the first condition is true, that means business phone is not null. That means you can pass it to another subroutine to do it. So that's definitely one way to do it. It's not the only way. This is just one way to do it. Did you guys do it that way?
Similar.
Similar. Okay. Well, first of all, let me go back and check to make sure this method works, and it does. You can see that I can input a business phone that is empty, and it will take it. Let me show you yet another way to do this. And I will use mobile phone this time so that I don't mess up the first one. So the first one is still going to be the same.
It's not quite right.
Sorry?
You have to check the business phone out of the if statement.
Right, change this one to mobile phone. Yeah, but I'm going to use a different structure this time too. So what I'll do is I will say if is null mobile phone dot value, then do nothing. Okay, I specify nothing here, and then I specify else if here. Okay. And this will do the same thing. Let me fix that one
You
last
don't
thing
have
here.
to specify that the cancel is false for that?
No, because it is by default false already. Cancel is by default false, and you have to set it to true if you do intend to cancel the update operation. So let me change this one to mobile. and change the message to. So when we are done with this one, we'll compare these two approaches and see, how they are similar, why they can both, fix the problem, and also, why they look different. So we switch back to the database. This time it's the mobile phone. We remove, the entire content. We move to the next field, and no problem happens. So let's switch back to the VBA code and just compare these two, event handlers and find out why they both work. With the first one, it works because the first condition to evaluate is simply this part here. It is just evaluating whether business phone.value is null or not. Okay, it's just evaluating that part. If that is true, okay, if business phone is not null and satisfy this condition, then it will go into the inner conditional statement and invoke or call isValidate phone number. And that's why by the time we call isValidate phone number, it is guaranteed to be not null. So that's how the first one works. The second one also works because it also evaluates is null mobile phone.value all by itself. But what if it is true? What do we do when mobile phone is in fact a null value? It does nothing. Okay? There's nothing between the then and the else if, which means when this condition is true, we simply don't do anything, which is fine. Okay? There's no need to specify an action when there is nothing to do for that particular condition. But what does that mean if I get to the second condition? What does it mean when I get to this condition here? I can only get to the second condition or evaluate the second condition when the first one is false. Okay? So by the time I get to isValidate phone number, I already know mobile phone.value is not null. Because if it were, it would have matched to the first condition, do nothing, and then get out of the conditional statement. Are we doing okay so far with this? Okay. Now there is a third approach to do this. Okay, the third approach to do it is to use a conjunction operator that is, a short-circuiting conjunction operator. So we'll go ahead and find out, which one is a short-circuiting conjunction operator.
It's been doing that for weeks. It won't go. The link to my office thing helps me, doesn't seem to work. It's forever offline.
So we'll ask Google instead. If you cannot ask Microsoft and get an answer, you'll ask Google.
That's what I've been doing. I can't seem to get anything from Microsoft.
Yeah, I find Microsoft very limited on answers.
But they sure want you to buy stuff, though. Okay, so here we have conjunction, logical conjunction, and we'll find out. Okay, it simply spells out the word and, A-N-D. Okay, right here. Let me just focus on the part that I want to focus on, which is this part here. If the value of the first operand, which is the one side of the AND or the OR, is sufficient to determine the result of the operation, the second operand, basically the other side of the operator, is not evaluated. So the use of the AND keyword as a conjunction operator should have worked. But this applies, I think, only to some versions of VBA. It may not apply to all versions of VBA. So this applies to VB 6.0. And there's the AND also operator. in that case too. So that's why I knew about the AND also operator, because it was defined in VB 6.0, except for VBA it is not defined.
Wait, are they saying and or literally logical dash and?
I think it's just AND AND, not logical AND.
Because it seemed to bold.
Because
all
they're
of it.
both capitalized, right? Well, we can go ahead and try to do that. I don't think logical dash AND is defined, but we'll double check and make sure that that's not logical and okay. Yep, that's not it. They use logical AND, because the word AND AND is used a lot in English too.
Yeah.
Then that's why they use boldface and logical dash uppercase AND to make sure that people understand that refers to the logical operator and not this is not a part of the sentence. Yeah. So AND should be AND should be short circuiting, except it is not the case in VBA. Now, the other thing about VBA or any type of Visual Basic product is Microsoft changes how things work from one version to another version. Okay, sometimes in one version, AND can be short circuiting, and in the next version, they decide not to do that. So there's some inconsistencies here. Are there any questions about these two solutions that do not make use of the AND operator at all? Questions? Okay. Okay, so there's one more question about how do we know that none of those fields, or I should say not all of the fields are null. So to answer that question, it is for the form before update, and the way we do it is to say pretty much the same thing. So you start with a conditional statement because there are multiple operations to perform under this condition. So you have to say if it is not the case of something, and I don't like smart editors like this, because it's too smart. Because I want to finish up my my structure first, and then I go back to specify the expression. Okay, so right here we can say, if not is null, business phone dash value. That's one of them. And I will leave this space empty. I will let you guys help me decide whether I should use and or. In this case, let's just use mobile phone dot value. Let's just deal with 2 at this time, because if we know how to deal with 2, we know how to deal with 4. The question is, between the 2 is null, should I use and or should I use or? That is right. Okay, you should use and because we don't want all of them to be null, and that's why you have to put an and here, and that I pressed the enter key. There we go. So this will make sure that not both the business phone value and the mobile phone value are both null. If one of them is null, it's good, but if both of them are null, then this will work. This will whatever is specified inside the then and the end if will execute. We will just go ahead and copy and paste the code from before, including the message box, and just paste it here. The message box has to change. We basically have to say at least one phone number has to be valid, has to be non-empty. So at least one phone number must be non-empty, and then the rest are the same. So that's pretty much the solution. Yep, go ahead.
You have if not, then show the message.
Oh, okay. Yep, you're right. Take the not out. There we go. Good point. So this way, if all of the phone numbers are null, then it will go ahead and print the message, undo the operation, so that you cannot commit the record into the database. Are there any questions about the partial homework solution? This is not all of it, but the rest of it is really just copying and pasting a whole bunch of stuff and changing, a little bit of it.
I've noticed when I was trying to just manually enter in a subfunction, a subroutine, that it didn't recognize it unless I went into the code, the design view and clicked on the 3 dots.
It does not recognize.
It didn't register it. It's an unknown unknown value or unknown function. Until I did that, then it would recognize it.
In other words, you cannot just start to type the name of a function and expect VBA to associate that to a particular event handler. That is correct. There are 2 ways to do it too. If you know exactly which control you want to add a function to, you can just go to that particular control thing. Let's say home phone here. So you can click on home phone, and it will automatically, give you the event handler for before update in this case.
Yeah.
So that's the other way to do it.
I was just doing typing in this subroutine for a fax number, and it didn't even register it.
And that's because VBA is doing some magic behind the scenes. When you click the ... or if you go through this thing here, it goes through an internal operation called registering. It registers the private subroutine in this case to that particular event. The name really doesn't mean anything. I mean, you can rename these things, and it will still register it. So the name is not useful. It is the action of pressing the ... button, and or doing what I just did. Use the drop-down box. It will automatically register that subroutine to be the event handler for that particular object.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really behind the scene, and that's why if you just type the name, even if you conform to all the standards that you have observed, in all the other subroutines, it still won't work. Okay. Any other questions about the homework assignment? No questions? If there are no questions, I'm going to move forward and try to finish up the last topic for this class. We missed one Monday and kind of fell a little bit behind because of that. And also this class is likely to be deleted, so there will be no more offering of cisp372 after this semester. The original purpose of this class is for GIS. How many people are coming from geography? Nobody? Geography. Geography.
You mean like building mountains?
Yeah.
GIS has an information system.
Yeah, GIS or Geography Information System is the reason why we have a class like this, because they use VBA in GIS quote-unquote programming. And at the time, CIS talked to GIS and said, why don't you let us do all the basic programming concepts, and you guys can focus on, the geography part of GIS programming. And they have now, they have basically, not used this class anymore in their programs. So they're teaching programming in-house now, and there's no need for this class anymore.
What's like ways?
Of
Their resources?
Well, from their perspective, I can sort of understand why they do it that way, because they don't want their students to have to take like a 3-unit CIS class and then go back to take more geography classes. They want to kind of interweave the programming concepts and geography concepts, more programming concepts and more geography concepts. So I think that's the reason why they are not using CIS classes anymore.
Well, maybe you guys should make this course a requirement for the business majors degree. The people who need to be able to work in offices and do stuff with Visual Basic and similar.
Well, I mean, you guys can tell me how useful is this class, so far.
I like it. It's good stuff to know.
Well, are you learning something that you can apply?
Well, yeah.
You think so?
I think so.
But how would you compare this class to the full-blown, Visual Basic class?
I haven't
Okay.
They're related, though.
Sorry?
They're not related. I understand the language is not the same.
They're not exactly the same, but they're close enough, for me to make that confusion, because because the and also thing was something that I picked up when I taught the VB class, and I thought, naturally, oh, VB, VBA, it should apply. No, does not apply got slapped.
I came into this class after Visual Basic, figuring we'd be applying everything we have learned in Visual Basic.
But that's not a prerequisite of this class, so we cannot do that.
Yeah, but I figured we'd be applying all that stuff to interacting with the applications from Microsoft Office more than just learning the basic programming essentials.
Well, it's a one-unit programming class that has no prerequisites, so I cannot teach you that way either. What you're looking for is a CISP 370 1.5, which is a continuation of the VB class. But this class is not intended as such. This class is intended to get geography students to get them into programming. But there's no GIS students here in this class. So that's somewhat awkward. Okay, so this, but I do want to at least go through loops in this class, even though there won't be any homework assignments, or at least no homework assignment that will count for your grade for loops. Now, because this is a very important concept. Up to this point, what we have talked about are basically just two types of statements. One type of statement is assignment statements. Okay, we can use the right-hand side to change the left-hand side. Okay, that's an assignment statement. The second type of statements that we have talked about so far are conditional statements. Okay, you can specify a condition if some condition then, and then you can specify the action associated with that condition. If this condition is true, we'll go ahead and perform these actions. And then you can make it more complicated by using else or else if, so you can check for additional conditions until one is true, then you execute that action, and then that conditional statement is done. But so far, we haven't really encountered any type of construct that will let you do anything that is a loop. In other words, we cannot go back and do something again and again, which is a very important concept in programming, because if all you can do is to change the value of something and branch and then merge again, that's only there's only so much you can do using those two types of logic. So loops basically finishes up all the control structures. Basically, how do you change the flow of a program? And instead of doing this, reading this part here, I'll just kind of jump into the actual code. Okay. And to illustrate, a loop, there are several ways to illustrate a loop, but I would use, a record set, which is an access-specific topic. How many people have taken, Microsoft Access class, the database class? Okay, so most of you have taken that class. What did you guys learn in that class? Tables, queries, and so on. Now, most of the time, if you can do something in queries, you should do it in queries. In other words, if there are two ways to do the same thing, one in VBA and one as a query, you should always do it in query first. Okay? Why do we want to do it that way?
The database engine and the query language are optimized to work together most efficiently?
Correct. And sometimes the query is not even executed on the machine that is running access. Did Dave? I'm assuming you took it from Dave Larrabee. Mm-hmm. Did he talk about how you can use access only as a front end to talk to a back end database that can be MySQL, that can be Oracle, that can be DB2, and so on? Did he at least mention that concept? Okay, so if you think about it that way, then your Windows box, is nothing more than a dumb terminal to a much larger, much more complex, and much more powerful database server. So that means when you run a query, when you specify a query, and just say, okay, locate all students, that has a student ID that is less than this value. Let's say that's what we're looking for. That query is not executed on this machine. It's not executed locally. That query is really sent to a remote database, and who knows how many servers are implementing that one single database server. So when that database server runs that query, it's using a lot more horsepower than it is available on your PC. And that's why I said if you have a choice, if there are two ways to do the same thing, and you can do it locally or do it remotely, you always do it quote unquote remotely by using a query instead of VBA. There are only so many things you can do in VBA that cannot be done, not easily, using a query. So I just want to state this first so that people do not abuse VBA code, because a lot of times, especially programmers, people who are exposed to programming first, if they can do it in VBA, they will do it in VBA first. because that's their strength. Their strength is procedural logic, which is VBA. But if they're exposed to database first, how tables are created, relational models and stuff like that, then those people will try to do everything using queries first because that's their strength. Yep. Okay. Okay, so what we need to do here is, there's a concept called a record set. A record set, as the name implies, is a set of records. And more to the point, a record set is like a window that you can use to look into a database table or a database query. In other words, if you look at a database table, you can look at it as a almost infinitely large table. Okay? We don't want to have to load the entire table into the memory of a PC before we can start to process it. So therefore, we have a concept of a record set, which basically means I just want to open up a little window to look at one record at a time in a table or the result of a query. That's the concept of a record set. Okay, so the first part here is, how do we make one record set? And that's how we do it. You just have to use dim to define your variable as a record set. But you don't want to associate a value with it yet. Okay, so this part, dim is basically the keyword that you use before you declare a local variable. My record set is the name of the variable. As is just a part of the syntax to separate the name of the variable from the type. And in this case, the type is a record set. And here, this part here is a little bit more complicated. It basically describes, how do we associate a window with a particular table in a database. And this is an example of how to do it. First of all, you have to use the word set. Okay. Now before this, we can just have a right-hand side and a left-hand side, and the assignment operation does not require the use of the keyword set. But in this case, you do need the keyword set in order to complete this quote-unquote assignment operation. There is a reason to it, but this is not the right class to talk about that reason. The reason has to do with, integers are simple objects, or they're very simple types. In this case, my record set or record set is a complex type of object, and the set keyword is basically doing a lot of magic stuff, with memory allocation. So that's why in this case, you do have to use the set keyword before the assignment operation. The rest of this, is just the variable that will be changed, the assignment operator, which is the equal sign. And over here, we have a much longer thing that we usually do not have to deal with. The first part here is current DB, the current database. The current database refers to the document itself, because remember, we are doing this inside a access document. The access document all by itself is a database, and the current database by default is that document. Open record set is a method of current DB. It basically says, okay, you want to open up a window into a table or into a query. What do you want to open up into? In this case, we want to open up a window into the table with the name contacts. Okay, contacts is the name of the table that we want to open the window and tick it, so that we can look at one record at a time. The last one is, how do we want to open up this record set? There are a few options. Okay, let me just switch to the bottom part here. There are a few options here. This parameter specifies the behavior of the record set. Dynaset means this is a two-way portal. Okay, it's a two-way kind of thing. You can not just look at the database, but you can also change the database using a Dynaset record set. There are things that you can use, that only gives you a view-only type of view into the table, so you cannot make changes accidentally. This one does allow you to make changes to the record through your record set.
So you can mess it all up on accident.
Sorry?
So you can mess it all up on accident.
So you can mess it up, yes. You can mess it up in a script, which is very bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you think about it, messing up a table or a record manually is bad, but you can only do so much damage if you do something by hand. But when you do it using a script, you just hit the run or click the button, and there you go. The database is corrupted. The next slide talks about, okay, now that we have a record set, how do we get started? The first one is we have to use a method called move first. This is basically telling this portal into a database and say, okay, rewind it all the way to the top of the table. I want to start processing from the top, from the first record of the entire table.
Now what if it's a specific part of the record?
Sorry?
A specific part of the record, like how this one here is saying, it goes to the last name.
This one here?
How it says record set last name. Now what if you didn't want to go to start with the last name? What if you want to start with the phone numbers or address or whatever?
You just change this part here.
And it automatically just gets associated with
That's basically the name of the column that you want to modify in the table. So it gives you it gives you access to the entire row in the table. You just have to change this part to match the name of the column that you want to access.
This is columns, the last one is rows.
So this is also accessing fields of a record. Now this part is specific to access. So to people who have not taken a class in access or database class, this can be a little bit foreign. But for those of you who have taken a class in access, this is how in a VBA program you can access individual columns of a row in a table. First of all, we open up a record set to look into a table. Then we can address which column we want to look at. You can only look at one row at a time, but you can also specify exactly on that row which column we want to look at. That's really helpful. Okay, the exclamation point is used to designate the field name to access in the record set. And this designation is also consistent in a query. So if you deal with a access query, this is also how you specify a column name using the square brackets. If your column name has a space inside, this is how you access a particular column in a table. And once you process one record or one row, you can move on to the next one. You can try to process the next one. And this is how you move on to the next one. You just say, my record set, which remembers is just the window that you use to look into the table, and then you have to invoke the move next method in order to move that window down to the next available record. And basically, you just keep doing this until this becomes true. My record set is the name of the record set, my variable, and the EOF or end of file method or function in this case will return true when you're already at the end of the entire table and there's no more records that you can deal with. Are there any questions about all of the stuff that we talked about? I know we are only talking about little pieces, but we'll make one. We'll combine all the pieces into a loop later on. So any questions about these 6 steps that we have talked about? How do we make a record set, which is a portal, a window into a table? Number 2, how do I connect a record set to a table? In other words, you can make a window all day long, but that window is not associated with anything. In order for a record set, the window, to be associated with a particular table in a database, you have to make the connection. And then 3.3 talks about how do we start from the very beginning, which is move first. Yep.
How do we associate a record set with a query instead of a table?
I believe you just refer to the name of the query.
Okay.
Yep. In Access, can you use the same name for a query and also a table? Does anyone know?
Should be able to.
We've got access open, let's find out.
You can use the same name for both. I don't know either, because I know that you can have one query to be based on another query.
Right.
Right.
Relation.
Well, I'll leave it up to you guys to experiment with that. But I think you can open up, okay, when you're using a query, you can change the record when you're inside the query too. You can have modify queries to modify a table from inside a query. So I think it will work on queries as well as tables. 3.4 talks about how do we access an individual field or an individual column of a row. Moving to the next record, which is 3.5, teaches us how to move on to the next row in a table. And if we keep doing this, we have to stop at some point, because at some point we'll hit the end of the entire table. And 3.6 talks about how can we know that we are at the end or not. Section 4 of this one talks about the actual control structure called a loop in this case, and how we can use that in the context of processing a database table. So this is just an example, and what we'll do is we'll do something like this. In other words, we want to find out, we'll process this and determine whether we should be sending a holiday card to a particular person or not. Okay. And we have to add this particular field because we want to remember whether we actually sent a card to that particular person before or not. It's a tag to keep track of that. And then the next one is more modification. We can change the contact details and contact list forms to include this newly added field. But if you want to change those things, it is a chore to mark this particular field. So instead, we'll just use a button to say update send card. And now we write the VBA code. Let's go ahead and look at this program line by line and find out what it does. In other words, this is the body of a subroutine that will be executed when you push a particular button on a particular form. I don't really care which form or which button, but this is the code that will execute when you trigger that action. The first line, line 1, is just declaring our variable as a record set. Okay, so we talked about that already. Line 2 is something that we talked about as well. We are making a connection so that we are associating my record set as a variable to a specific table called context, in this case, in the access document. Now, if your access document is making ODBC connections to a Oracle database, this will become an ODBC connection as well to the Oracle database. And that is completely transparent to VBA. Okay, is that okay so far? Does everybody know what is ODBC? Okay, no, kind of? It's basically just a remote connection to a database that is running on another computer. The third line, which is outside of a loop, okay, it is important to remember this part is not a part of the loop. You have to do it before the loop. You want to make sure the window is moved all the way to the first record of a table or a query so they can start processing from the very beginning. And here we have a loop. The loop starts on this line. Line 4 is the beginning of the loop. The end of the loop is line 16. You can basically look at line 4 as the open parenthesis of a loop, and you can look at line 16 as the closed parenthesis of the same loop. So that means, in order to start a loop in VBA, you have to use the word do while. This is not the only kind of loop you can use, but it is the more common kind of loop. And the end is loop here. Okay? So everything in between, that means everything from line 5 all the way up to line 15, these can potentially be done over and over again. Are we doing okay so far with the concept of a loop? which part is marking the beginning, which part is marking the end, and which part can be executed multiple times. Okay. If there are no questions, we'll look at the other part of a loop. The other part of the loop is the condition associated with a loop. In this case, the condition associated with this loop is not myRecordset.en, EOF, or end of file, which is basically saying, okay, when you see do while, you can replace that with the English words as long as. Okay, do while it means exactly the same thing as long as. So this is basically saying, if you look at line 4 is just a cryptic way of saying, as long as we are not at the end of the table that we're looking into using myRecordset, do the following. That's basically what it's saying. What if the record set is empty and this becomes true before we even get to line 5? Then the loop will not even do anything. It will not perform line 5 even once. If end of file is true to begin with, it will skip all the way to line 17 or whatever is after line 16. That's the behavior of a do while loop. In Visual Basic, they also have a different kind of loop called do repeat. Now, do repeat is a little bit different because it will give you at least one iteration. Or I think you have to do it at the end here. I think it's loop and then do repeat, something like that. Can't remember exactly the syntax. Now everything from line 5 all the way up to line 15, they're all inside the loop. In other words, all of these lines can get executed once, 0 times, or more than once. It depends on when myRecordset.EOF becomes true. The first one, myRecordset.edit, is turning that window into a two-way window. If you don't mention myRecordset.edit, it does not, you cannot make changes. Okay, you can still view the items inside the table, but you cannot make changes yet. So this is important because you're basically saying I'm about to make changes to the table. This part here, okay, from line 6 to line 9, it is only one single statement. Why do I say this is only one single statement? If you just look at this code here, what gives away that this is just the beginning of a conditional statement? There's a particular language feature that we use here to combine multiple lines into one single line. What is that? The underscore? The underscore at the very end of one line. That's exactly it. This underscore here, and this underscore here, they're basically saying from line 6 all the way up to line 9, it is as if it is just one single line, because the underscore is called a continuation symbol, which means I want to use the next line to continue the current line. So let's take a look at this. What this is saying here. Everything from here all the way up to this part here. Okay, all the highlighted portion here. That's just really saying it's prompting or displaying a message box on the screen to ask, send card to the first name of a person, space, and then the last name of that person and the question mark. It's basically an interactive way so that you can go through an entire address book, and this script will ask you, for this year, do you want to send a card to this person? Okay? Now what about the rest here? This is something that we typically don't use as a parameter to message box. The VB yes no is a constant, but the constant used in the context of my message in MSG box message box will display not OK and cancel, which is the normal button to display. Instead, in this case, it will display one button with a caption of yes and one button with a caption of no. In other words, we are controlling what the captions are on the buttons of that message box. Okay, so now it makes more sense this way. Okay, because whether do you want to send a card to this person, yes or no. And the rest here is just comparing. When you press a button, either yes or no, message box then returns a value, because it doesn't make any sense if message box has no way to tell your program in VBA which button the end user pressed. And this is how your code can tell that the end user pressed the button yes. Okay, there's another constant called VB no, to confirm that the person typed pressed the button called no. So in this case, I'm just comparing to yes to confirm whether that person pressed the yes button or not. If that is the case, if that person, whoever is operating the database program, pressed yes, then all I'm doing here is to set the column called send card of this particular row representing a single person to 1, which means yes, we do want to send a card to that person this year. Are we doing okay so far with this? The else is simply saying the person who is operating the database program did not click yes. Now, in this case, if all that you have are the 2 buttons, yes or no, that means that person, the operator, pressed no in this case. So I will use a 0 to put into that particular column called send card, so that this time I remember I do not want to send a card to that person. Yep.
Which is returned if they click the X up in the corner.
That's what I was gonna
There's a default. I do not know which default it is.
I think it's automatically false 0.
But in this case, since I'm only checking for yes, anything other than yes, would not be recognized as a yes. But that's a good question. I do not know it for sure.
Can we find out?
When you run this code. When you run this code, you have to remember what message box return. So you have to put it into a variable first. Then you put a breakpoint in the program. When it stops at the breakpoint, you hover your pointer over that variable. Most likely than not, more likely than not, it will just report a constant, like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or something like that. Then you have to kind of look up and find out exactly what that means. Which button is that number corresponding to? I'm suspecting closing the box itself is the same as clicking cancel. So it will basically report VB cancel in that case, because it's not yes or no. It is a third value. It is a cancel. But that's just my guess. Okay, it will just report back cancel in that case. Now line 14 is also very useful. Okay, very important, because at this point, all the changes that I have made to my record set exclamation point send card, all that is done to a buffer. That buffer is local to this computer. No changes have been committed yet. I have not told the Oracle database remotely and say, go ahead and make that change. Up to this point, there has been no change yet. If I don't want to commit the changes, I still have one last chance to stop it. On line 14, when I when I tell my record set to actually perform the update operation, then there will be no other thing, because this is basically saying, okay, go ahead and tell the database engine to make the change in the table. Before this, no changes have been made, and at this point, all the pending changes will be made to that one single row. So what this means is, when you are looking at a particular row using your record set, you can make multiple changes to multiple columns, and then make one change, make one update at the very end to update that one single row. Are we okay with the concept? In this case, we're only changing one column, but you can potentially change a lot of different columns. Line 15 is also important, because line 15 is basically saying, I'm done with this row in the table. Let's move on to the next one. What happens to this loop if I did not have line 15?
Just leave it.
It would just be asking the same person, right? Do you want to send a card to tag? No. Do you want to send a card to tag? No. Do you want to send a card to tag? No.
After a while, you can change your own computer.
Then you have to, after a while, you have to go to the VB window and stop execution.
Sometimes it seems like D12 does that when you want to submit a quiz.
Really?
Do you want to submit your quiz? Yes.
Yes.
But do you want to submit your quiz? Yes.
Are you
But
sure?
Are you sure you want to submit your quiz? Yes.
It will
Okay,
keep
now that
asking.
You can't change anymore. Do you still want to submit your quiz?
Yeah.
Oh crap! I wanted to change one of those. Too late.
Or maybe it will just keep asking that until it is past the submit time of the test. Then we'll just pop up the next message and say,
Sorry.
oh, sorry. Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what it does. They ask you like 3 times, are you sure you want to do that? It's like, yeah, I said yes the first 2 times.
want to do it.
Do while not submission time, message box. Do you want to? Are you sure you want to submit the test? And pay no attention to the answer too. Okay, so after line 15, we have line 16, which marks the end of the loop. So what this loop is doing, or what this entire code is going to do, is to open up the contact list, okay, basically a table in the database, go through each and every single entry, and ask you, do you want to send a card to this person, this Christmas? Okay, and you can pick yes or no. So at the end, after this is all done, then all of the send card column, well, I should say, the send card column for all of the entries of that table will be updated. At that point, you can pick up another program, let's say Microsoft Word, and use the mail merge feature to print out the envelope for all those holiday cards. I use this as an example because I actually use this kind of thing. We had the database first created for our wedding, for our reception, and so we had all the relatives, friends, and acquaintances entered into the database. So when it's Christmas time or at the end of the year, we decided, well, instead of handwriting all the envelopes, why don't we use the table that we already have? And it just kind of comes in handy, for that kind of thing. You can just print out all the envelopes and these days, since we can also print out the cards, you can automate the whole thing.
Insert name here.
Huh?
How personalized.
Oh, you can even personalize the messages. You can have categories of messages. Or you can tell different things too, like to friends and family. You can tell certain things to acquaintances at work, and you can talk about other stuff. So everything can be somewhat personalized.
So they can think that they really got a personal thing.
Hey, it's better than those cards that you get that says dear tag in a different font.
Yeah.
Would you like to buy a certain font? Yeah, but does everybody kind of get a rough idea of what this code does and how it gets it done? Okay, because I can talk about loops, just by printing, by using a message box that would just print sequential numbers, but that won't be very useful. It does not apply to a Microsoft Office product, and this one does. This one ties in to an Access database.
So this one is actually asking a person who sits there and goes through the whole database one at a time.
That
Yes,
is correct.
No, yes,
Yes.
no, yes.
Yes. Now, if you don't want to do that, to go through the entire database, you can have some other fields, and have additional logic, to ask, to guess what type of people you want to ask, whether to send a card or not. Yep.
Can you make something similar that has a checkbox, remember my answer for all future questions?
Always send card.
Didn't ask me
So that you don't have to answer that question
How
again.
would you do something like that in VBA?
Well, but that's a question about how do you want to design the table, right?
No, we just want
So
to
checkbox
run this
inside
program
of-
every time. We just want a checkbox on our message box that says, "Do not ask me again."
We'd have another
Not
column that
asking.
says remember.
Yeah,
Exactly.
always.
Okay, but
That would be
Yeah.
good field.
Or 2 extra boxes, or 2 extra buttons. One that says yes to all, and one that says no to all.
Now, but we are talking about this, only in this class as a VBA class. But if you are actually in a database class, you don't modify the context table for something like this, right? Because you want your database to be canonicalized, which basically means you want to start another table that will be joined with the context table in order to integrate this information. In other words, you can basically remember, which years you have sent cards to a particular person, because you just have another table to remember, the answer to that question for prior years. And then you can have another table to remember whether the answer is always going to be yes or always going to be no. So you can, and the last portion that is useful is, I believe, I have not tried it yet, but I believe that this one can be a query. you can replace context with a modified query, or some, not a modified query, but you can replace that with a query and actually make changes to the database that way too. In other words, this can be, context, can be the name of a query that joins the actual context table with, history of, your answers. So that way you can actually, remember, you can do processing that way too.
Now, if your question about it, you have a reference to go check.
Yep. And if you're going that far, you might as well make a form that will have optional fields like only ask if that person have been receiving a cards for the past 3 years, and then make the 3 a text box or a drop down box. So that way you can just say, okay, I don't want to bother with people that I have not contacted for the last 5 years. And then you can have another field to remember whether they sent you a card back. If they didn't send the yeah, but you can have another table.
If your check printer is stuffing a check in the envelope with the card that's been pre-printed for them in the amount that's equal to the amount they sent you last year.
Yeah, you can extend this program to like way beyond what it is
You'd
it is
never
now.
have to associate with people again.
It'd be like having Facebook.
It's like Facebook.
Well, Facebook, Facebook is nothing more than a big database with a with a good front end. I mean, that's basically what it is. It's a huge database, and everything should be done in SQL code or queries, unless you cannot do it. This is one of the few things you cannot do with SQL, because SQL cannot force an interaction with the end user, and that's why I picked this example. Are there any questions about this code? The explanation is actually, here as well. I have line by line explanations of this thing. So you might want to read that part if you want to get all the details out of this. So are there any questions about loops? No questions?
You could build SQL strings in it, couldn't you?
SQL
Strings?
strings?
For a SQL
Like
statement.
select asterisk
Yeah.
from
I've seen it in
contacts
Express,
where,
it doesn't work.
where an ID equals a name that you're looking for or something.
Right.
Can you issue
You mean-
an SQL command from
When you connect?
the VBA code?
Or, well, let's say you select something from a pull-down menu, and
Mm-hmm.
whatever you select gets a certain part of a SQL statement, and then it gets combined with something else, and then you take the whole SQL statement and query it.
Okay.
I've seen it, but I could never get it to work.
Okay, I think, let me get back to the page that I want to get back to first, and then I'll ask you whether that's what you mean. Okay.
When you get a lot of records in Access, boy, it just really chugs along.
Are you talking about this line here? Can you customize or change this line so that you can include parameters that are specified in the form?
No, it was more building syntax for another language, SQL.
For SQL.
It's kind of like instead of opening contacts,
Right.
you open a query, but you create the query there.
Oh, you want to
using SQL
create the
command.
query on the fly.
Using SQL command.
Right.
Yes, you can. You can do that. And when you do that, I think there's a way to use Open Recordset to refer to that query that you just created and executed on the fly. I don't know exactly how to do it, but but it can be done. Hmm?
You get books like this thick.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of patience. But it can be pretty powerful. You got a lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
records, 30,000 records.
Yeah, but remember, if you can do something using SQL, do it in SQL and don't do it in VBA.
Yeah.
Because
well,
in
you just
VBA
want the front end of it to be.
Exactly. Or, well, if you want interaction, if you identify, certain records and these are problems, and you want to prompt the user interactively, that's one place you can use VBA code.
Yeah.
You can also do it, you can just dump it into a report, but if you want, user interaction responses right away, then, this kind of code can be useful.
Yeah.
You want to know how to do it in Access specifically, or?
Any other questions related to this? I mean, that's a very good question.
I don't know why did you
fact, what you're asking, if I were to look for, if I were to look for the answer to your question, which is using VBA to create an SQL query on the fly, and use Recordset to process it, right? That's basically what you want to do, is to connect all these pieces together. So I would just, you go to Google and type VBA, SQL query, create, use VBA to create query. Yep. Clicks.
I typed in VBA to build a SQL string. Yeah, but that's it right there.
Yep. Okay, and it shows you the exact code that you need down here. So I think it's command copy.
Pretty useful.
But how do you run that query on the fly and get your record set to associate with it? So that's the next step. Oh, this one, maybe. There you go, right here. So basically, when you say open record set, let me bump up the font size. Can you see it?
We'll deselect it.
There you go. So you just put the entire select statement inside as the first parameter to open record set. So instead of the name of the table, you give it the entire query. So this way you can run any query you want, in VBA. But in this case, I'm not sure whether you can go in and change the record set, because in this particular call, you can see that it does not specify DynaSet at the very end, because it does not even specify how you want to open up the record set. So in this case, this may be a view-only kind of query, and you cannot make changes, when you go through the record set. Okay. Any other questions? If there are no questions, I think we have one more topic to go over, and then we are pretty much all done with this class. Debugging Vba Code, that's the last topic. I think many of you have seen it already because I used it a few times. The first part is what is a syntax error? A syntax error is something that can be caught by the editor itself. Okay, when you type in the code and you move on to the next line using the cursor key or you press the enter key, if you have made a syntax error at the time, VBA will basically ding you at the time and tell you that, okay, there's something wrong with the syntax of this line. Now VBA, the editor of VBA, it works line by line. In other words, if you don't move from one line to the next, it won't spot problems of that line. But when you move your cursor from one line to another line, then it will start to spot problems. We have done that a few times, sometimes unintentionally. Okay, so if I make a mistake here, if I just say if true without using the then and press the enter key, this is a syntax error. It says, on an if statement, a then or a goto is required at the end. Now, don't ask me what is a goto because it is taboo. Okay, I cannot talk about it.
It is taboo.
It is taboo because once people start to use gotos, the programs will become really, really hard to maintain. So I personally would just avoid using gotos altogether unless you're in an assembly programming class. Because then that's the only thing you can use to go from one place to another place. But unless you're in that class, but this is a syntax error. And you can also see the line that has a syntax error is now highlighted in red. Okay, and this is the editor doing it. This is not even running the program. When I press then everything is good, but it does not automatically end the conditional statement. I have to press end if. Now, at this time, okay, let me just show you the program at this point. The subroutine mobile phone before update is syntactically incorrect. Even though the editor does not complain, it is syntactically incorrect. Let me move this up so that you guys cannot, do not need to strain your necks to do it, to see it. Okay. So the subroutine mobile phone before update is actually syntactically incorrect at this point, because the last conditional statement, which is a trivial conditional statement, whatever is inside the then, will always execute because true is always true. But from the syntactic perspective, this is incorrect because I don't have an end if associated with that condition. But yet the editor does not catch it, because the editor cannot catch it because some people do not want to type end if until they are done with the inside of a conditional statement. And that's why VBA does not complain at this point. But when you try to run this code, okay, if I go here, and is that mobile phone?
Mm-hmm.
And move it. Uh-oh, it doesn't.
You need to change it.
Hmm?
You need to change the value first.
Oh, so they will do the update. Now it complains, compile error. In other words, it doesn't say it's a syntax error, it says it's a compile error, which is basically a syntax error. And the message is fairly clear in this case. It says block if without end if. So basically it's saying you have to type use end if here. And before you can make changes, you should stop the program first. That, and then just type end if. Syntax errors are easy to catch, okay? Because by the time the program gets to that point, it will always crash. It will always give you a runtime error and display, in the message box, what type of error it is. So I personally would not worry about the syntax errors too much. However, there is one, thing you have to be careful about. You guys saw, how before I make changes to mobile phone, that message never popped up, because unless you run the program up to that point, it does not pop up the error. Okay. Now, what is the downside of this? Why is this a bad thing?
Be sitting there for a very long time, and then
Exactly.
blow up on somebody who didn't even do it.
Exactly. It can blow up on someone who is not even expecting, any type of runtime error. So in other words, someone can write a $20,000 line, 20,000 line program, which is not a really long program, 20,000 line program, and not actually exercise every line in every single case. So not all of these errors are caught, during the time of development or even beta test. When the program is deployed to your end customer, for some strange reason, maybe the end customer will enter a value that is invalid, that has not been tested before, and at that time the program can step onto that single line, the conditional statement that does not have an end if, and then what do you think would happen? The customer will see the error message. Okay, now this is a unique property of VBA, or any scripting language, any interpreted language will do this. On the other hand, we do have programming languages that are called compiled languages. With a compiled language like Java or C or C++, all syntax errors will be checked. Every single line will be checked for syntax errors, so you will never encounter problems like this. Okay. I believe there's a way to force VBA to do syntax check on all lines. Does anyone know or can confirm that? Okay, I think you can force VBA to be very strict about things so that
This option explicit doesn't do it?
I don't think explicit deals with the syntax. I think that deals with, when you have an assignment, the two types of the assignment has to match exactly. You cannot have implied conversion of types. Oh, that kind of reminds me of one thing. While I was grading the previous assignments, I saw several people, not one, there were several people who refer to, okay, one person declared integers, for the first number, the second number, and the third number, and then use assignment statements to pick out, I think, in one case it was just referring to the name of the text box. So you have text box, num1, and then equal symbol here, and then the integer variable on the other side. It works, but that's because that is without strict, okay? Because there were a few, actually, implied conversions. When you when you say text box, okay, it is automatically, VBA automatically says, okay, you're referring to text box, but there are so many properties of a text box. Which one do you want to use? Well, VBA tries to be smart, and there's a default property. The value is the default property. So if you don't specify a particular property to use, VBA will automatically says, I think you want to use the value property. So that's automatically attached. The value of a text box is of what is the type of that? Is that a number? It's not a number, right? A text box is a general text box, which means the value property of a text box is a string, okay? But you're trying to assign that to an integer variable. So now the types of the two sides of the assignment operator do not equal to each other. So VBA then will look up its own internal table and says, okay, these two do not match, but hold on, I may not want to complain at this point because it has an internal table or an internal mechanism to see if it can resolve the differences between the types. So then it will look up the table, or internally it has the logic to say, oh, this side is a string, this side is an integer. Do I know how to convert a string into an integer? There are many ways to do that, okay? But it will have a default method of using the val. So the val is actually implied and actually applied implicitly in that case, and not explicitly. There's no problem with this approach. The program still works. However, it is not a very good approach to rely on implicit conversions, because sometimes the implicit action may not be exactly what you want to do. So that's why, when you're writing programs like that, it is always a good idea to call to the properties explicitly and also do the conversions explicitly. And that's what the word explicit is useful for, is mostly for type conversions. Any other questions? We're pretty much at the end of this class session, and which is the end of the entire second 8-week class. No questions? So what do you guys like? How do you guys like a 1-unit class like this?
It's not my first one. It's not the first one.
It's not the first one? Well, as I said, there are multiple classes that you might want to look into if you kind of look at these things, go like, I might want to learn some more about this. One, if you like the programming aspect, conditional statements, loops, subroutines and stuff like that, this class merely scratches the surface of those topics. If you want to know more about those topics, cisp372 is a good class to take. If you don't want abstract stuff, you want to actually do more coding, then you can take cisp370, which is a VB class. So both of those classes will be a good follow-up for this class if you enjoy or if you need to understand the programming aspect of this class. If you look at Access and go, well, seems to be a pretty useful program and want to know more about using Access, then you want to take CISA for Application 320, which is the Introduction to Access class. So that would be a good class to take.
cisp300, what language does that use?
We use pseudocode in that case. We are not using any particular programming language. In that class, we don't just run programs. Okay, we don't just write the code and let VBA run the program. All we have to do is to click on something. In CISP300, if I am teaching that class, you'll be the one running the program. In other words, you have to trace line by line what the program is actually doing. The whole idea is after CISP300, you should be able to pick up any programming language and understand what each line of the program is actually doing. That's the basic idea of CISP300. It is not language specific, but it teaches all the concepts that are common to all programming languages, or most programming languages. P370 is more specific. That's Visual Basic. Yep.
I said that's pretty useful. Being able to just, or 300, being able to just pretty much get the gist of any line you're looking at.
But it can be boring too, because you're not actually running any program. You have to trace or track down the execution of a program line by line.
Yeah,
for everything. Yep. Yeah.
I'm a C-side and programming major, and I had to take P300 like 3 times because it's that boring. I did great in all the other classes after it. It's just that one.
Well, you didn't take P300 from me, did you?
No, I didn't get a chance. I kept wanting to, and your class would fill up before it was my turn.
Okay, any other questions?
When
No
do
other
you think
questions?
these will be graded?
Hmm?
When do you think this latest one will be graded?
Oh, pretty soon. I can get this one graded. Now that the class size is more manageable.
I bet you can grade the whole assignment tonight before we get home.
Yeah, but I think it's good to at least go through the notes. Everything that I have on the website, all the links. It's good. It's a good idea to go through all those links. Because those concepts are all somewhat important. Okay. Any other questions? Now, if you guys think a class like this, or at least parts of this class, is useful, tell me which part of it is useful, because we are going to cancel or delete this class, out of the catalog altogether if I don't hear anything from you guys. Yep.
The part at the very end,
Mhm.
the last assignment,
Mhm.
we were validating data on its way into a database, and the
And this
stuff
stuff
you
here?
covered today about interacting with the database on the fly,
Yeah.
that stuff would be very useful after Visual Basic, after 370.
Yeah, but to get to that part, this class is already kind of stretching it, because getting
Well-
through conditional statements and loops without a programming prerequisite is kind of hard to do.
Yeah,
Isn't there
but
already a
just-
class after 370?
There's 371, 372. It's Advanced Visual Basic, which is more VB stuff, but as far as I know, it doesn't go into depth about interacting with these applications in any way, shape, or form.
That is correct. That one is a if you want to write a VB standalone program, then CISP 371 would be useful. But that class still does not talk about how do you use VBA in the context of an application. Yep.
But isn't Microsoft going away from that?
From VBA?
They're going more towards the server point, and that's totally separate from VBA.
I do not know. I think
That's
they
what
still
Dave
need.
was talking about with this.
Okay.
That's what he was thinking maybe they were.
But even if you move away from that, you still need custom code, that is currently done by VBA. So I'm not sure how they can deal with that part. And then VBA is also a quote-unquote dying language. Visual Basic in general is getting replaced by other programming languages, such as Python. Python is getting a lot of momentum, and that's partially why GIS is switching and not they don't need this class anymore. It's because in GIS they switch from VBA programming to Python now.
Python is awesome.
Well, Python is a programming language, okay? As far as I'm concerned, a programming language is a programming language. It's no more and no less. I mean,
The default value of the attribute is awesome is true for any programming language. There are only a few that reassign it to be false. So, I mean,
how many people have heard of Python and want to know more
I've heard of
about
it, I
Python?
haven't really done anything with it.
Okay. Well, I can talk about Python, in about 2 minutes, just so that the general idea of what Python is. Well, Python is a general purpose programming language, okay? Kind of like VB and kind of like Perl, You can do just about anything with it. It's also an interpreted language, which means, it's not really designed for performance or speed, but at the same time, it can be very interactive. The main difference between VBA and Python, if you learn VB or VBA and want to transition to Python, the biggest change that you will see, if I want to demonstrate, I can show it right here. Syntactically speaking, if you look at the syntax, it doesn't have and if. It doesn't have loop to end the construct of a loop. What it does is it uses the indentation of your code to indicate what is included in what else. Okay, now that's a big, syntactical deviation from most programming languages. Most programming languages want to use a particular word or a particular symbol to define the beginning of a block, and then have another one to define the end of a block, kind of like an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis. Python does not do that. It only uses indentation. So your program will look very differently when you program in Python. For beginning programmers, I don't think the differences between the languages would actually be of any importance. The syntax will be the main difference, initially. For someone who is more experienced, then some of the under the hood type of feature will start to become important. Yep.
One of the strengths of Python is that for anything you want to do, there's a library for it that you import using import, and it just works. You want to add big numbers to your program, import big numbers. You want to add an actual living professor to your program, you type import TAC. It's there. They've got some sort of voodoo going on in the back end that it doesn't even have to be written yet. You import it and it just works.
Okay, what Christ is saying is Python is so widely used and so many people have been contributing code to the library, quote unquote library of Python, that if you're interested in, say, web development, if you want to write scripts to crank up HTML code, there's a library to do that already. If you want to interact with a backend database, there's a library to do that already. If you want to import an Excel spreadsheet and look through all the cells inside an Excel spreadsheet, there's a library to do that as well. So that means you learn one language and it can be used for just about anything. But I can say that about Perl as well.
Perl's a little more archaic of a language. You got to remember to put the right character in front of all your variables, and then one time it's an @ sign, and one time it's a semicolon, and it's the same variable each time, and it's like, what the smoke were they fucking when they wrote this language?
Well, Perl is okay. Well, if you look at the language name itself, PERL, it is already kind of obscure. PERL stands for Practical Extraction and Retrieval Language. Okay, and Perl is a combination of different languages too. It's a combination of C, awk, bash, and so on and so forth. And all of those are awkward languages to begin with. So it's a combination of all of these awkward languages, which makes Perl an extra awkward language to learn for beginners. But to me, it's a programming language. A programming language is a programming language. And the best part of Perl and Python, in both cases, is that they have a very rich library to do stuff. If you want to do HTML, push out HTML documents, using a database as a backend and push out content based on the content of your database, you can do it in Python or Perl pretty easily. If you want to write a script to do a daily maintenance kind of thing with a database backend, you can do it in Perl, you can do it in Python, because both already have library subroutines to help you talk to a database backend. If you want to import an Excel spreadsheet, as I said, you can do it in both. If you want to write a script to automate certain things so that it is pretending to be you to click on other websites, you can also do it in either language, because both have support, as a browser in a programming language, so to speak. Okay. In other words, some of you may have certain things you want to do every single day, with a certain website, but you don't want to have to sit around and actually click the buttons every single day. You can write a script to automate that. And both Python and both PHP already have libraries to make your job easier, because they already know how to deal with SSL connections and so on and so forth. So that's why Python is gaining momentum, is because it is not just for one single purpose. It doesn't work just for Microsoft products. It's just a very useful product altogether for just about anything. And OpenOffice has a built-in Python interpreter. Okay, we're here to talk about Microsoft Office, but if you look into OpenOffice, which is no more, it's called LibreOffice now. There's a built-in Python engine. If you want to write the scripts like this, you can do it, except you can do it in Python as well as VB-like, a VB-like language. So would that be useful? You know, maybe a Python class?
You don't have a Python class?
No, we do not. That's the whole thing. You know, I'm planning to make a new class, you know, for scripting languages. You know, just in general. Would that be a useful class?
Is that languages also that would be used on like Androids and phones and stuff?
No, Android uses Java. You know, that's the official programming language for Android.
But there's other apps on different phones for programming.
iPhones use Objective-C, which is it's not C++, but it is based on C2. So those are not exactly scripting languages. You know, they're both compiled languages. But Python is a good general purpose language. So is Perl. Yep.
Android uses the just-in-time compiler, which will take your basically Java scripted language, which Java can run in a scripted mode, and then automatically compile it to native machine code on the fly.
But it doesn't take Java code. It takes Java bytecode and optimize that on the fly to native code. It's not the Java code. It is the Java bytecode that it takes to do just-in-time compiling. There's a slight difference. Okay. Well, that's all the time that we have today, and for this whole second 8 week. I'll still be around. You know, I will keep Moodle up and running. You know, so the class will still be there. If you guys have any questions, you know where to contact me. Your grade is going to be based on your homework assignments. Okay, most of you turn in your homework assignments, and you already know the map from your percentage to your grade. So I think most of these, you know, if people are showing up here and doing homework assignments, I don't think you should get a grade that is lower than a B. It will take effort to get a grade that is lower than a B.
That's good to know. I want to ask you about the Linux networking class that you teach.
Okay, let me stop the recorder first.
You really didn't miss it.
It's not.
I'm the first